Welcome to tonight's program, Reducing Inflammation with Healthy Living. It's going to be presented by Denise Sullivan with the University of Missouri Extension. My name is Beth. I'm the adult programming librarian with the Mid-Continent Public Library. And so I did want to go over just a couple housekeeping items. We are recording the program this evening, and it will be available in a couple days, probably after the 4th of July on our YouTube channel. We do have handouts for the program, and I will send those in an email to everybody, along with the link to the survey that is also in chat after the program. And we are going to ask that people remain muted so that we can get a good recording without a lot of background noise. We'll have people put questions in chat, and we'll go over those at the end of the program. I also wanted to mention some of our upcoming programs that might be of interest to folks. And the first program that I want to mention is actually one that's being held in person at a couple of our branches on July 8th at 2 p.m. at our Edgerton branch, and on July 18th at 6:30 p.m. at Woodneath. We've got Clean Keto for Good Health. Nancy Oglesby will talk about what constitutes a healthy ketogenic diet and ways that you can make the right choices, whether you're looking just for a lifestyle change or for short-term weight loss. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. On July 19th at 2 p.m., this one is on our MCPL 360 Facebook page. We're going to be joined by art teacher Sarah Poff, who will be guiding everybody in the painting that you see there on the screen. You do need to just go to our Facebook page at the day and time in order to access the program. If you go to our event calendar and look at the registration page, it does give a list of materials that you can have for the program. And then we have author Regina Daniels. She's also a photographer, and her thing is to photograph abandoned buildings around Kansas City and other metro areas. So she'll be sharing the pictures of the buildings that she photographed, as well as the history behind those buildings. And that, again, is an in-person program. It's taking place at several different branches in person. On July 20th at 6:30, it'll be at our Smithville branch as well as on Zoom. That one is hybrid, so you can register if you want to attend virtually so that you get that link. And then the final program I'm going to mention is Thomas Hart Benton's Kansas City Musical Evenings. We're going to be joined by Dr. Annette Richter, and we may know Thomas Hart Benton around here as an artist, but he was also a musician and actually recorded an album. And so she's going to be talking about the musical evenings that he hosted at his home here in Kansas City, as well as the album that he recorded. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Denise so she can get started with this evening's program.
All right. Thank you, Beth. And let me find my way to my screen share. And are we seeing the right one?
Yes.
Do we have the right? Okay, very good. Finally, it looked like it took it a while to pop up. All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking a little bit of time out of your evening today to learn a little bit about the relationship between inflammation and healthy living. So I am Denise Sullivan. As Beth said, I am with the University of Missouri Extension. I am a nutrition and health education field specialist based in Jackson County, but I do programming along with my colleague Melissa Cotton across the Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties, which we refer to as our Urban West region. And so today we are talking about, reducing inflammation with healthy living. Whoops. So yeah, that's the right one. Today we're going to just kind of we're going to do a basic definition of inflammation, and what that is. We're going to examine the positive and negative effects of inflammation. Going to take a look at food and and lifestyle habits that contribute to or fight inflammation, and hopefully you leave here with a framework to develop some strategies for how you can incorporate a healthy lifestyle, or maybe change a few habits that might need addressing. So at its very basic definition, inflammation is really part of the body's immune response. It's kind of a defense mechanism, and it will respond to injury, illness, infection, and stress. Because our bodies are different, our immune responses are also different. And this kind of explains why some people respond to things like poison ivy, or to peanuts, or to certain foods. And that can be very strong offenders, but that yet some people might not have any kind of reaction at all. And that's all based within the immune system. And when we think about it, any type of wound or infection or any kind of damage to tissue, it wouldn't be able to heal without some sort of inflammatory response, particularly when we're talking about acute inflammation, as opposed to chronic or long-term inflammation. So when we think of acute inflammation, there's some very, common signs that we might see associated with that. You might see, it's going to be painful. We can kind of see a little bit of maybe an infected hand or something on this image here, but the inflamed area is likely to be painful, especially if it's touched. And chemicals that stimulate the nerve endings are released, and that's what makes these areas more sensitive, is this part of these chemicals and hormones that our body releases upon injury. We might see some redness, and this usually is occurring because the capillaries are kind of more filled with more blood than usual. So that's where that redness comes from. We might see some swelling that's caused by a buildup of fluid. And as that blood flow increases to the area, it also kind of warms it up. It heats it up. It's going to feel warm to the touch. And as things, get swollen and and get that inflammation setting up, that really impacts that swelling, sometimes there can be that loss of immobility, because it's just that swollen that you can't really move then. So it's those 5 inflammation signs that really applies basically to things that we can see on the surface of the skin. If we're thinking about inflammation that might occur deep within the body, like internal organs, we're not going to notice some of those things. But when we think about certain types of, say, lung inflammation like asthma, there's really not because there's no sensory nerve endings, that pain doesn't come in. But we might experience the byproduct of that swelling that occurs with an inability to breathe, because those lungs can't move like they normally would because of the inflammation. A lot of diseases or medical conditions that cause inflammation often have a name that ends in itis. So, bronchitis, otitis media, the fancy name for like an ear infection, cystitis, an inflammation of the bladder, Dermatitis is where skin would be involved. So when we think, that's just kind of that ending of the word of the, the medical condition. Acute inflammation is really kind of triggered by, it's that response to sudden injury or illness. When our body and our body cells are in distress, this response is triggered to release chemicals, including antibodies and proteins, to alert the immune system. And then the immune system kind of sends in its first responders, those white blood cells, so that they can try to trap whatever is causing this offensive reaction, so that it can protect and heal the tissues. And this is just kind of triggers a complex chain reaction that causes those blood vessels, to leak fluid, and causing that swelling, that redness, and then the pain that might come along with that. Thankfully, this is a relatively short-lived process, lasting, few hours or a few days, just depending on what type of response here has been triggered, what kind of acute infection we're dealing with. Now, in contrast, chronic inflammation is a long-term ongoing process that kind of keeps the body on high alert all the time, because the body is sensing some kind of attack from something that's not playing nicely with it. So the immune system just kind of has to keep fighting, and it can't really defeat this perceived invader. And so the damage is often occurring kind of just invisibly, and it can be happening, without us really even knowing. And when that happens, with, some major organs, like, our heart, our pancreas, other organs, when we think about that chronic inflammation associated with some of the common health conditions that we deal with, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, certain autoimmune diseases that might involve different organs, or even, even the skin. So it's a process that's kind of always going on, because the body's always kind of just fighting and trying to protect itself. So with chronic inflammation, some of the symptoms that might be recognized, fatigue is one of the very first ones that is often recognized. And fatigue can accompany so many things, so it can sometimes get lost. We might still have that fever that's associated. We might see a rash with certain skin conditions. Joint pain, rheumatoid arthritis is a very good example of where joint pain can be involved with chronic inflammation of a condition. Sometimes mouth sores might be involved. Then we get into some deeper things, chest pain, abdominal pain, and those are going to be some of those signs that that can start to be very dangerous in terms of thinking about those major organs that kind of are housed all in our chest cavity and our gut area. Certain blood tests, common one is C-reactive protein, the CRP. That's a common blood test used to measure inflammation, because it measures a protein that's kind of produced in the liver, and that increases with response to that inflammation. So there's others that might be utilized as well. Another one is the SED rate, or sedimentation rate, that measures all other elements in the blood. Those are two of the more common ones, CRP and SED rate. And what research is telling us, we're learning the relationship between chronic inflammation and some of our more common diseases. This list here: cardiovascular disease, including atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, as well as stroke, diabetes, asthma, arthritis, both rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. Produce inflammatory responses, certain cancers, Alzheimer's, and autoimmune disorders. And, when we think about things that are kind of more bowel related, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, that's where we have that inflammation happening in the gut, and it's always just trying to fight whatever is going on there. Conditions like cardiovascular disease, we start to see that plaque buildup in the arterial walls. And so the body sees this plaque as a foreign invader. And so it sends in its first responders. And then, as that plaque continues to build, those arteries thicken. And that's what makes heart attack or stroke much more likely to occur as those arteries thicken with that plaque. Chronic inflammation can be the result of many things. Here's a big list here, but lifestyle factors, and I like to refer to that as what we might refer to as modifiable risk factors. So things like poor diet that leads to excess weight, overweight, and obesity, alcohol, stress, poor sleep. Those are things that that we really can take control of, and that's why we're going to focus on some of those strategies of how we might look at those modifiable risk factors and what we can change in our lifestyles to to be able to address some health concerns. Then, we have that overactive immune system, and this is where autoimmune disorders kind of come in, and that attack healthy tissue, kind of mistaking it for a pathogen. It's it's the body fighting against itself, and these can come out of nowhere. I actually had one, kind of find me about 5 years ago. Never had any kind of issues, and all of a sudden it was. Sun exposure is one of the things that triggered mine. And so when we think about how those can just come out of nowhere, it's kind of, mystical, really. Then there's, things that we might be exposed to, pollutants, tobacco, other chemicals, especially over a longer period of time. When we think about, short periods of exposures to some of these kinds of things, it's not as likely, certainly possible, but it's that long-term exposure that can lead to some of those inflammatory responses. And sometimes it comes from a failure to address, some acute inflammation cause. So that's where, if it's something that has started out as an acute inflammatory problem, one of those short-term kinds of things that usually kind of does its thing and you move along, if that is just it kind of like simmers inside the body, and then it might turn into something that is just a continual battle. And that's how we see sometimes that relationship between how the immune system gets in that response with particularly some autoimmune conditions. Maybe it started as something kind of simmering in the background. That's one of the theories that we've even had with my condition. So let's talk about some of those lifestyle factors, those things that we do have control of, those things that we can change. And one of the biggest things that we need to address is diet. We all eat food, and so we need to be very mindful of the choices that we're making. These are some of the more common types of foods that have been shown by research to be contributors to chronic inflammation. So refined grains, and then we're talking about grains that have been stripped from their whole form. So this is where I always like to make a comparison of, say, whole wheat bread versus just wheat bread. And because that whole wheat bread has, all of the part of the grain, the bran, the outside coating where the fiber is, the endosperm, which is usually what is just used to make a wheat bread, and then the germ, which is the part of the kernel, the grain, where a new plant would sprout and grow, and that's where the healthy oils are at in a grain. So we want to look for those whole grains as opposed to refined refined grains. I mean, I usually jump to, to bread first, because that's kind of the first thing people think of, but we can look at that again too with brown rice versus white rice, of having that, it's a much more whole form. Whole grain cornmeal versus, degerminated cornmeal, something that might not have all of kernel, all of that corn grain in there. So we start to pay more attention to labels. So refined grains are those things, we see some there in the picture, it's the, the buns or the white pasta, that we see in a lot of places, in a lot of kitchens. Sugar, one of the key things that can feed inflammation, particularly highly processed forms of sugar. And when we think about, sugar as it comes either from a sugar beet or a sugar cane, that's kind of sugar in its most natural form. But then, sugar can have things all done to it as well. But then again, we look at sugars that come to us naturally in our fruits. That would be, that's not considered a highly processed form of sugar. It's coming naturally within a very healthful kind of food. Processed meats, particularly thinking about things like lunch meats, sausage, hot dogs, things like that, that just go through, again, anything that goes through a lot of processing is going to be further removed from its natural form. Trans fats, and these are the types of fats that are found in hydrogenated fats. And it's one of the most common fats used in many convenience foods. And manufacturers like it because it's very shelf stable. It helps foods last longer. But it's certainly not good for our bodies. And so when we think about hydrogenation, that's actually a process in where a liquid oil goes through a chemical change and to turn it into a solid fat. And they do that by adding hydrogen through under heat and pressure to take away it messes with the chemical structure, basically. And so it changes double bonds to single bonds, and fills up all of the hydrogen spaces that might be available on that molecule. So more natural forms of fat tend to be better for us. Liquid oils definitely would be a better choice in terms of looking at the difference between liquid oils and solid fats. Alcohol, particularly in excess, is an inflammatory, pro-inflammatory type of food product. But we will take a look at some dietary lifestyles where occasional red wine is common in some countries where they don't have a lot of the diseases that we have here in the US, and they drink some wine. So it's that word in excess, and the words that we like to use, moderation. And then, at the bottom of the list there, gluten and dairy, particularly for those who are sensitive or intolerant. Now, I do always like to say there's a difference between, a gluten sensitivity and then diseases that like celiac disease. That's a totally different topic and different discussion. But people with celiac disease is one of those things. Gluten is definitely on the list. Can't have that because it does not work with their digestive system, and it cannot process the wheat and wheat products. But in sensitivities, just might be one of those things that maybe dairy, for instance, someone might not be able to drink fluid milk, but might be able to tolerate a fermented dairy product like a yogurt or a cheese. So the sensitivities and intolerances are a different category than allergic reactions. So a little bit of fine line difference there. And it's important to note that even, those sensitivities, again, our bodies are always changing. We can see those sensitivities to certain foods change over time. Particularly as we age, we might start to develop some sensitivities for things, like wheat or dairy. So what can we do to fight inflammation? It starts with, colorful fruits and vegetables and just a lot of variety within there. And when we think about all of the colors that we see in this picture here, and we think about things like the My Plate, which is our teaching guide from the USDA. Half that plate is fruits and vegetables. That should be our goal. And for anyone wanting to eat a more healthful lifestyle, but particularly start thinking about the colors of those fruits and vegetables, because one of the things that we know is there are certain phytonutrients, which goes deeper than just vitamins and minerals that we've always known about, phytonutrients that travel in color groups. And there are 5 of them that we want to strive to achieve on a regular basis. Anything that's, in the red group, so things like strawberries, watermelon, cherries, red peppers, thinking about reds, that's the first color group. Then there's yellows and oranges. And that might be squash or oranges, yellow peppers. You're going to hear me say peppers a lot. They can span a lot of the colors here. Oh golly, what else we have? I started to say spinach, so I haven't gotten to green yet. But just start thinking about yellows and oranges. Bananas, someone said in a class earlier this week, and it's like, no, I told them, nope, hold on bananas, because we don't eat that yellow part. It's going to go in a different family. Then we have the green color group. And again, green peppers, okay, green beans, spinach, kale, broccoli, all those things in the green group. Then we have the blue, black, and purple group. So this is where our berries come in: blueberries, blackberries, eggplant, black beans, kind of where those are the first ones there that come to mind. Then the white, tan, and brown group. And this is where it's like, I always think about the things that I'm starting dinner with. Onions count, garlic counts, mushrooms, a lot of our other types of beans, pinto beans maybe. And that's where the bananas come in. The part we eat is the white. And so that's where that bananas would fall here. So once we start thinking about that, we always say, eat the rainbow. And if we start thinking about that and use that as a proactive planning tool and be very intentional about getting all of those color groups as we choose our fruits and vegetables, that's going to be a big step for us in fighting inflammation. We'll see leafy greens called out specifically. So that's where, spinach, kale, collard greens, Swiss chard, any of those leafy greens. Nuts, we'll see nuts come in, and particularly walnuts are getting a lot of attention right now, but certainly almonds, cashews, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, pepitas seeds, all things that we could include that fall in those nuts category. Fatty fish, and so here we're thinking about salmon, mackerel, sardines. Not a fan of them, but I can eat eat salmon several times a week. In fact, one of our goals that we are hearing more about is trying to include fish, particularly fatty fish, 2 to 3 times a week. Tuna counts as well. So again, variety here as we're thinking about this. And then olive oil. And as a prime oil of choice. And if you know anything about